Welcome. My name is Geraldine Cosh. I will explain a little bit about myself in a moment, but we are going to be talking about how we identify product safety legislation. So this is a 45-minute webinar. It will be recorded. And this is the reason why it's best. I don't think anybody's got their camera on. You don't have your camera on. It's why you're all muted as well, so that when we do the recording, you can remain anonymous. If you put it in the chat, any questions that you've got, sorry, not in the chat, in the Q&A function, they will remain anonymous. They won't be published in the recording, but I can still see those. So please do that if you have any questions. This is the first of 5 webinars we're going to be doing this year, which is really exciting. And thank you so much to ICW. I'll explain who ICW are in a moment. And this was the first one because when we're looking at product safety, it's best to start right at the beginning and talk about the legal framework. And that's probably one of the most important things and one of the things that you have to do with your product, amongst other things that you need to do. I had to do a project once where I was looking at specific legislation in 93 countries around the world. So that's challenging, right? It's a challenge because of language, interpretation, costs, access, etc. So I'm going to share with you about how I approach that project. So I'm going to give you some tools and some tips and resources because I'm very generous, and of course, because ICW are very generous as well. So that's what I'm going to do today. If we can't manage to get the links across to you, I'm going to do a demo. I'm going to share my web screen and just show you how I'm going to do that. And hopefully you'll find that really, really helpful. So just a little bit of etiquette, which I'm sure we all know by now. Please actively participate. So I've got something called Menti. I don't know if you've ever heard of Menti. But it's a really useful tool. If you can, I know it's a bit of a struggle, maybe it won't work or the IT doesn't work, or you're watching this on your phone and you can't participate, I get it. But any queries you have, the questions, not in the chat, because we've just discovered that's not working, but in the Q&A function. So in the Q&A chat, please put any questions in there. The lines are all muted and they're done so for the recorded, and they're all being recording. So if you need to drop out, not that I want you to drop out, I want you to stay. If you want to share this with any of your colleagues, you'll be able to do that with the recording after. I am going to explain who I am in a moment, I promise, but I'm just holding you there for a minute because talking of a Menti, this is what a Menti is. So we've learned a lot on how to make these sessions as interactive as possible. And it also doesn't make me feel so alone. I know there are people there. I can see your names, a lot of familiar names. So thank you so much for joining. But I want to see, this one is a bit of a test actually to see if the Menti works. And this is the first of 5 webinar sessions we're going to do. So how you use this Menti platform, in case you don't know how to use it, if you just take your phone out, this is one way, I'll explain another way in a moment, and you open the camera, and then you scan the QR code, it will bring you to the Menti website. And I'm going to do the same thing just to make sure that I've done this correctly. And hopefully it should come up with a question. And the question is, how do you identify product safety legislation? So I'm putting this back on you, and then you're going to have to present it. If it doesn't work, okay, it's okay. If the QR code doesn't work, if you go to menti.com, and you just put in the code 14659695, you will be able to access it that way. If that doesn't work, then please do put in the question and answer box, how do you identify legislation? So I want you to think about that while I then talk about myself. So I'm just giving you a bit of time. Instead of singing a song, which I can't sing, I'm going to let you think about, and hopefully the Menti works. I'm going to keep picking on you, the people that have already put the information in the Q&A. If you don't mind just letting me know if you can use this or that it works, that's great. Or if you're having difficulty, that would be good. So, and what I will do is I'll go on my other screen. This is the great thing of having 3 screens, is I can see if people are starting to put the information in, and then we can share that. So while you're doing that, great, I can see it. I can see some colours up, and it's very exciting. So while that information is coming through and everyone's getting to grips with how to use Menti, I'm going to talk about who I am, in case you're thinking, who is this lady in front of me? So my name is Geraldine Cosh. I am a product safety consultant based here in London, in the UK. I had to update the slide because it's 19 years in April. So 19 years of product safety consultancy experience. So nearly 20 years I've been doing this. I can't believe that. I've trained lots and lots of people on product safety, risk assessment, product specific requirements on various topics. I've worked on doing many training sessions, which I thoroughly enjoy. And I've done lots of work with the ICW team on various webinars, which is a joy. Just some key current activities, just to give you an idea of the work that I'm involved in. I work on injury data collection. So I'm a little bit obsessed with data, specifically injury data with ROSPA. And I will explain any acronyms on the slide, but if I miss any, just let me know in the Q&A function. But ROSPA are the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents. And they're working in partnership with the Office of Product Safety and Standards, so OPSS, on collecting injury data from a number of hospitals here in the UK. Some of you might be aware that we used to do that here in the UK, but now we're looking at trying to re-establish that fundamentally. And there is some great information within hospital systems on product-related injury data. So that's an amazing project that I'm working on. I'm also the technical author of a number of PASs. So PASs are publicly available specifications. I'm going to talk about one of those a little bit later on as well. But PAS 7055 is to do with button and coin batteries. PAS 7100 is to do with corrective action and recall, and I'll mention that a bit later. And PAS 7050 is about bringing safer products to market. So I was honoured to be the technical author on those British standards. And I've also worked with the projects at European level, which are sponsored by the European Commission. Speak being a really good one of those projects. If you want to find out more, I can share the screen with you actually and show you the link if you want me to. Please put it in the Q&A chat. But if you just Google Speak, so SPEAC and European Commission, the project should come up. And that actually has amazing resources and information on, related to legislation, I guess. If you're working with Chinese manufacturers directly, this is what the aim of the project was. It was the safe non-food consumer products in EU and China. And all of the information that we developed, all of the training materials, the webinars, the documents, they're all translated into Chinese and directed at the target audience of Chinese manufacturers. So it was a great project of which the information is still available online if you want to have a look at that. And I've also worked on the CASP project, so the Coordinated Activity of the Safety of Products. So I wanted to introduce myself, but not only that, let you know about some key resources that are available relating to product safety specifically. I've also worked as an expert witness. I do risk assessments, and last year I was actually in coroner's court, unfortunately, but that's another part of the work that I do as well. And working with many manufacturers, retailers, and distributors, economic operators in developing safe processes or working on the safety of their products. So that's a little bit about me. What I'm going to do, just because I can see it now, and I'm going to share with you all, if you haven't seen the results of the Menti, so I'm just going to drag it over and hopefully you can see this. No, you can see Zoom, can't you? You can't see my Menti slide. Too many boxes open. Okay. And I think it looks so pretty. I love the colours on this. Okay, so how do you identify product safety legislation? So this is great. I could have passed it over to all of you. And I think that's one of the great things when you do a training session is facilitating discussions. So how do you identify product safety legislation? Let me see if I can dig in here. Test house advice, definitely, 100%. That's what I was going to talk about today. So alerts, I'm not sure who the WTO are, but I probably should know, right? But alerts from government departments, social media definitely is a really good thing. It can be, depending on what platforms. LinkedIn is really, really good. I love LinkedIn. Standards, the business companion, yes, so I've mentioned that later on. Standards websites, benchmarking, lab updates. Okay, networking is really, really good as well. And I think that's why if ICW are not on your list of network, they should be, because they can also help with updating you on product safety legislation. Gov BSI websites, webinars, so being here today, you're looking for toy specific. Okay, great. So that's that's fundamentally what my presentation is going to be about, is covering all of that. So there's nothing on there that I've missed, I don't believe. And what I will do is I'll go to the next question as well, which I'll ask in a moment too. So great, that works. And you're all awake, you're all still with me, so good. So this is, as I've mentioned, this is the first of 5 webinars that we're going to be having. So today you've got myself, which is great, just really talking about the kind of, when I say basics, it's, you know, some people understand this. What you need to do to get the product out in the market is the legislation, but it doesn't mean that it's easy. It's not easy at all. It's not basic in any sense, but it's that fundamental, let's get the legislation right. And how do we do that to start with? Then we're going to get, in May, we're going to be talking about the general product safety regulation that's coming out. And we've got the lovely Rutger, who I'm working with, who is awesome, who will be presenting that with me. And I'm really, really excited about that webinar to learn more about the GPSR and what that means, what the practical implementation is of that and implications of it. So looking at these subject areas, the next one is data, as I've mentioned. I'm a bit obsessed with data, so I'll talk about how I use data in product safety. But I really would appreciate if you want to send an email, or you can send it to me via LinkedIn, or you can send it to the ICW team, or you can put it in the Q&A function. When you look at these topics, is there anything that comes to mind that you want to make sure we cover? Because the material hasn't been developed yet, and we're doing this for you. We're not doing this for us. So please let us know if you've got any specific topics you want us to cover. And then there's going to be 2 other sessions. So we've got one in September and we've got one in November. We do have some topics which we think we're going to cover, but I really want to find out from you what you'd like us to cover. So this is up to you. Also, if you want to register for the next one in May, the QR code is on the screen at the top. So you can scan the QR code and you can register for that now if you want to. And then in July, if you want to register for that one, it's at the bottom of the screen. Again, you can contact the ICW team if you want to register if the QR codes aren't working. So the times as well are different. The lovely ICW team, it's very late for them tonight and they're logged on as well, watching this webinar, but it will be recorded. So please do just register. And if you can't make that date, don't worry. We'll make sure that you get a recording of the information, and we're here to support you with any questions that you have. So the next question, if you've still got your phone or you've still got the website open, I've put the next question on the Menti website. And what we're asking you is, what would you like to hear more about? So when we've got these webinars that we're looking for here back in September and November, so after July, we've got later on in the year, September and November, would you like to hear on cosmetics? Would you like to hear about labelings and warnings? Do you want to hear about EU exit? I'm personally a little bit bored on that one, but that doesn't mean that everyone else is. So someone mentioned to me, these topics were mentioned to me. So I just wanted to get a bit of a vote to see which one you'd prefer to hear more about. And then we can arrange for a webinar on whatever topic it is. Or maybe it's something else you want to hear about. And if it is, please do put it in the Q&A function or email the ICW team if there's a specific topic. But if you could fill that out or vote on that, that would be really, really great. Oh, risk assessment. Risk assessment's the most popular. That's brilliant, because that's my favorite subject. Okay, so we'll have to do a webinar on risk assessment, but keep voting on that one, and then we can make sure we do a webinar for you. I'm also going to go to the next slide on the Menti that's really open for any other comments. So you have the Q&A function that you can put information in, but also on the Menti, if that's working for you better, you can just write something up there. And I've got it on the side. I'm not going to share it. If you have a question that you want me to answer, you can put it there on the side in the Menti feature as well. Okay. Right, I'm going to see if I can actually open the chat function. Enable, let me see. No, it doesn't. Everyone, let me see. I might be able to open it up. I didn't realize I had such power, so I might have just opened up the chat function, which is really great. So there's no excuse. You've got the Q&A function, you've got the chat function, and you've got Menti to talk to me. So don't leave me alone. So any other comments is on the Menti as well, and you can you can talk to me through those resources. So very, very quickly, these webinars have been brought to you with the support of ICW. ICW is a really great company and a really great system. I met Gary Lamb, the founder, a couple of years ago, and he is an awesome person. He's a great person to work with. I think when you're dealing with such a complex issue, such as compliance and testing, it can be very stressful, and management of that whole thing. And what he has developed with the amazing ICW team is a software solution that helps manage all of that. And the best way of explaining it so you can understand is it's like the TIC version of Alibaba. So TIC is testing, inspection and certification. And you probably know about Alibaba. We can go on and you can buy lots of different products, but that's basically what the ICW system will do, is that you can go on and you can get, it's lab agnostic. That's what I think is great about it. So I worked for a testing laboratory for many years. And I did find it was a bit unfair from the point of my client's point of view, that they could only use the systems for that specific test reports from that test laboratory. And I found that a little bit unfair, but obviously I understand why that is the case. But this is where ICW are that bit different. And they are an amazing team of approximately 60 people that work now with ICW. They started in 2016 and they work with over 3,000 international clients. And this is what I think is really great, is that the system, you can have it online, you can have it, there's a tablet function, there's the mobile function, and it makes this really complex data really simple and easy to use. I don't know whether it's because I'm getting old, but I like things that are really, really simple. I also like things organized, and that's what the ICW system does. So a lot of what we do as quality assurance specialists or product safety specialists is actually admin heavy, and admin is an amazing job. It's an important job. If you're ever in that court situation that I mentioned earlier, you know, I guarantee you the state of your admin is going to help you keep sane when you're trying to find that specific test report, or you're trying to find that inspection report, or any information relating to your product or risk assessment, which we will talk about at some point in this webinar series. And as well, the system is really cost effective. So for as little as, it's about $5 a month to use it as just to store your files. Obviously, there's a certain price point and price plan if you want to develop it and make it bespoke for you. But it is a really reasonable source to use to sort out all of your compliance programs and your information. And it provides amazing analytics. As I mentioned, the importance of data. Data is so important. Where are you spending all of your money? Where are your products failing? What are the issues that you're having? You have this dashboard here, this Power BI dashboard that helps you focus on where to target all of your activities. So instead of spending all of that time on the admin, you can really focus on where you need to be and put your resources in your team. So that's a little bit about ICW and the amazing team. I did put I put the booklet in the chat, but I don't think people can access that. So we'll make sure you get a copy of that explains a bit more about ICW. Any more questions about that, please let me know and we can answer, and the team can answer that. So very quickly, why do we need legislation? Well, fundamentally, we need it because we want to ensure we're selling safe products, right? And as a consumer, so I'm a consumer, I believe we're all consumers, maybe some of you don't purchase things, not sure if that's the case, but I want to feel safe when I'm buying these products. When my children are going to a store or they're going out with their family members and they come home with these products, yes, there has been times where my eyes will roll and I will say, really? Perhaps maybe to my mother or father, did you actually buy that? What is that? But most of the time, you know, I actually feel quite comfortable and confident when I'm buying something off the shelves here in the stores here in the UK. And that's because of our legal framework. There are flaws in it, there are challenges in it, and it's why I have my job. But fundamentally, we do have quite a good structure here in protecting consumers, and we want to maintain that. And I think another reason that's really, really important that my colleague talks about when he presents with me is about fair competition. It's not fair if you as manufacturers or retailers or whoever's, you know, on the call working in product safety are working every day to ensure the products you're selling are safe, but then you're being undercut by maybe then I wouldn't even call them a competitor if they're not making as good quality products as you, but who are selling products that don't comply. that don't pass the requirements. They haven't put all of the effort that you've put in to ensure the products are safe. And it's really important to ensure that it's a fair, level playing field for the economic operators that are out there, and also for consumers, right? And when I buy a product, I should have access to safe products just as much as anybody else should. And I think it's really important to have that fair, level playing field on the market. So the key thing that legislation does is it talks about safe by design. So a lot of the standards you might work with, you might know about. In short, when you follow those standards, it's safe by design. I'm going to use a toy example. Please put in the Q&A on the Menti if you want me to talk about another type of product. I can see some people are putting some information. I want to see, oh, toy safety. Okay, so someone's put toy safety in there. If we look at toys, safe by design, then you would need to follow the EN71 here in Europe, the EN71 series of standards, or in the US, the ASTM standards. And then also production control is really important. So as part of the conformity assessment process, which I feel is underutilized, if I'm honest, by economic operators and rarely understood by economic operators, it's really important that you ensure when you are developing that product or that toy that you have the controls in the production process to ensure, and that's the whole conformity assessment process that's mentioned in legislation. So one piece of one document I'm going to suggest, and I'm going to be brave here and see if the chat functions working, is something called the Blue Guide. I don't know if anyone else has heard about the Blue Guide, but it really helps what I'm talking about in this slide. It helps add more information. Actually, if I put everyone here, let me try, maybe it's my fault. So I've put in the link there to the Blue Guide, and if anybody wants a little bit more of recommended reading, I guess, I think it's missing off the end, so do let me know if that's come through. Okay, that's a document that I would highly recommend just to understand what this means, this whole process of conformity assessment and safety, and some of the other topics I'm talking about. I would recommend having a little look at the Blue Guide. So let's take a quick look at an overview of product safety legislation. And maybe some of you know this or some of you don't, but you've got the general horizontal. People talk about horizontal legislation, and that's things like the General Product Safety Directive. That's what the GPSD stands for there. Okay, somebody said page. Oh, that's the first one. Thank you for noting. Sorry, I've got too much on my screen and I missed the end off. So do the second link and hopefully you should be able to get access to the Blue Guide, but let me know and I'll put it in again if not. So you've got the horizontal legislation, you've got the General Product Safety Directive, you also have other pieces of horizontal legislation, such as the REACH legislation, so that's to do with chemicals, and that's fundamentally applicable to all products. And then you get vertical legislation, so product-specific legislation, so toys being one example. So you've got the toy legislation, you might have PPE, medical devices, that's it. So thank you. I'm excited the chat works actually. So thank you for letting me know the chat works. And then you have standards underneath that, and a concept that comes up quite a lot and is used quite a lot, and I'm explaining it for those that may not know, are things called harmonized or designated standards. I mean, I don't know if anybody knows what that is. If you want to be brave and put that in the chat of what that means, then that would be great. But there's this term that's used here in Europe and in the UK known as harmonized and designated standards. But you have legislation, you have standards, you have lots of different documents, and I'll talk about those in a moment. I didn't give much time, to be honest, for anyone to be brave enough. But when we talk about the term designated standards or harmonized standards, we are actually talking about the concept of presumption of conformity. So if you follow a designated standard, then you can claim presumption of conformity. And the differences between designated and harmonized is purely because of EU exit. So designated is what we call the term here in the UK, and harmonized is what they call in Europe, but they're the same thing. So if you hear these terms, it did take me a while to get my head around this, to be honest with you, when it first happened with the EU exit. But designated standards is in the UK, harmonized standards are in Europe. But example for toy is that the toy series, so the EN71, the toy standards, if you comply with those, you have what's known as a presumption of conformity, that you're complying with the Toy Safety Directive. So it's better defense for you. These standards, one could argue, are still voluntarily, but you'd have to be very careful to deviate from these standards. You can, of course you can, if you have good reason to, but it's strongly advised that you comply with or test to any designated standards or harmonized standards. Some are written in law, but very rarely is it actually specifically called out in the law. So this whole concept of this legislation, I just wanted to give you a bit of further reading today, is if you follow the Blue Guide, if you have a read of the Blue Guide, it talks about this whole concept of this. If you do want to as well, what I'm going to do now that I realise I can use the chat function, which is great, that's a link that should be available on designated standards, and on harmonized standards I've just put in the chat, and then a link here on designated standards. And why I'm putting them in the chat is because actually those websites are really good as well to follow and to know about those websites too. So when we mention standards, if anyone's ever been on a standards committee meeting, I'm also, I work with the British Standards Institute, the department within that's called CPIN, that works closely with BSI, and it's the Consumer Public Interest Network. So I actually sit on a number of committees, and I represent consumers on those committees, and I help support other consumer representatives when they're sitting on a number of committees, and it's a really well worth interesting thing to do. But when you sit on these committees, you have industry stakeholders, test laboratories, consumer reps, you may have the medical community, you have experts that are in their field, and they're all together and they help develop these standards. And that's what's important as part of the legal framework and the regulatory framework. And you have the national standards body. So you have BSI on here, which is the British Standards Institute. And then you have international standards bodies, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a moment. So you've got CEN, CENILEG and ISO and IEC for the electrical and equivalent bodies there internationally. Then you've got this concept of harmonised and designated standards, which you're all the experts on, and you know what that means now when I mention that. And then you've got international standards, you've got national standards, you've got industry standards, and it's just so much to try and understand what all of these things are for your product. But not to kind of ruin your day, but my thought is, in my opinion, I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's an international standard, if it's a harmonized standard, if it's a national standard, if it's an industry standard. If it's relevant to your product, you should know about it. And quite often I will hear the debate, well, it's voluntary, I don't need to comply with that. And I get it. That is a valid argument. But if your argument is it's voluntary, I didn't do it because I didn't want to, that's not a very good position to be in. The argument I would like to hear, if somebody says, well, I didn't follow that, and it's because, well, actually, because perhaps that standard is a bit old and we've got newer criteria, or our product is a bit of a hybrid product and it's a mix of a toy and other things because it's new and it's novel, so we've taken parts of it, then I get it. But I think if you're just saying, well, it's just voluntary or it's an industry standard and I just didn't know about it, I think that's a bit of a poor excuse. So I'll give you some examples of some of those things later on. And this is where the network's important. People have mentioned about network and contacting the testing laboratories. They're great, asking them, what are all the requirements for my products? What are the standards? What are the legislation? Is there any industry practice that's going on? Is there any membership organisation that I could join that could help me understand what other organisations are doing in my area? So 2 documents I mentioned earlier on was a PAS 7050, bringing safe products to market. All of this whole concept is mentioned in here. It's free to download these documents. If you just put it into your search engine, PAS 7050 or PAS 7100 is to do with recall and corrective action, you should be able to get access to these. They're known as standards, but they're codes of practices, they're PASs. But I think if you're working in the area of product safety, you should most certainly know about these documents, and they're free. So there's not really any excuse not to. So how do I do it? When I mentioned earlier that I had to look at, multiple requirements around the world, this is where I started. So I just went to the ISO members website. If you just go to ISO, and do you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to do, I'm going to pull up the website here, just the Zoom website I've got here, but I'm just going to go here and I'm going to go to ISO members. And I'm just going to show you how I do it and how simple it is. It's a lot of work. It's still a lot of work. But I just go to the ISO members website. And what this is telling me is this is all the national standards body for every single country that's part of the ISO. It gives you an idea if they're part of a technical committee, if gives more information about whether they're a member body or a correspondent member, etc. And if you want to know, I want to know what's going on in Canada, I can click on here and I get the information of the member body. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to give you everything you need, but it's a starter and it is a lot of work putting in. You've got an email here, you've got their website. If we go back, just because I'm going to show you because I'm more familiar with it, I'm here with the BS, the British Standards Institute is the website I'm more familiar with because of my location. So if I go down to United Kingdom and I've got BSI here, it's actually going to bring me to the website. When I did it earlier, it didn't work. So let's see if it happens now. But this is a really good website because this is where but they want you to buy the standard, right? But I just want to give you an example. If I want to search, and this doesn't work all the time, okay? I'm just giving you an example. I want to know what the standard is for kettle. So we love kettles here in the UK because we love drinking tea. So I put kettle in here, straight away, it's giving me the standard. I'm not saying that's the only standard, okay? But it's a starter. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if it's a new product area for you, you really don't know where to start, you can try this. It won't always work, right? Sometimes it won't come up. And there, already I've got something to go on. I've got, I see a specification here. It's a BS, it just means it's a British standard. And then if it's a BSEN, it's in Europe, but then BS have had to adopt that as well. So when it's a European standard, each of the countries throughout Europe have to adopt it, and BSI is still part of that even after EU exit. And the key thing, so here I can see it's 1985, which is a little bit old, but if I just click on that, you can see it's published in 1985. So that's what the number there is, usually the dates, and this is the number of the standard, and you can see it's withdrawn. So it's not, if somebody gave you a test report for kettles and they said, yeah, I've tested the product for kettles and it's to BS 6557, it's not relevant anymore. So that's not, it's a quick sanity check that you've just checked it here. Same thing if I do kettle again and I go to that one, I can see that actually it's the current one because the date changes. Probably could do with a bit of an update, or maybe they've checked it and it's absolutely fine. That's standard, but that's what I do. So I'll go, if I'm looking with multiple countries, it depends, okay? There's many different ways that you can do this. And it is a jigsaw that we're working in product safety, but that's just one of the tips that I would do, one of the things that I would look at. Another thing you can do is look at, you've already mentioned it, and you know, Intertech Insight Bulletins. If you put that in your web browser, you'll come up with the Insight Bulletins for Intertech, and you can search them, which is great. SGS, another test laboratory, their safeguards is brilliant. And then if you look at recalls and notifications, the OPSS is the Office of Product Safety and Standards. You can search on there too. SafetyGate is the EU SafetyGate, and you've got the CPSC. If you search on the SafetyGate, similar thing, let me pull up a website again. It used to be known as RAPEX. So when you do SafetyGate, don't just put, you've got to put EU SafetyGate in, and it will bring up the website. And the same thing that I'm doing that I did before, I want to search the alerts. Let's hope this works, right? And then I want to look for kettles. I want to see, has there been any notifications for kettles? I do a quick search. You can search specifically if you want to, a specific year. And it's coming up with some results. I can see there's a gym weight kettle. Okay, got a kettle here. This is telling me that this was subject to a notification. Not sure what's in Poland, but again, it's giving me an idea of the standards, which is great. It doesn't always do that, by the way. It doesn't always tell you what standard it didn't comply with. But I know from the BSI website, I've got that standard I need to look at, and I've got EN 60335 part 1, and then part 2, part 15, 60335 has lots of parts to it. So that's how I identify standards applicable to my product. And here you can see on the US, this is from the CPSC. This is equestrian helmet, so helmets that are used for horse riding, and they actually failed to meet the requirements of ASTM F1163-15. So if I'm making equestrian helmets, or any of my clients are, I would expect them to know what that standard is and if it's applicable for my product. So then once you know, so you've got the legislation, you've got the Europa website, you've got the US, the CPSC website here, the markets that you're in. You might have had to contact the national standards body, which can get tricky, especially with language, etc. and the product you're in. You need to keep up to date with that legislation and information. So some key tips that I would have is know the regulatory body within the country that you're distributing your products to. So in the UK, it's the Office Product Safety and Standards. They send out regular alerts of, you could be like horizon scanning. You want to see what they're looking at the moment, what are their issues in those countries. CTSI, the Chartered Trading Standards Institute, have an amazing website, which is the business companion, that's not only telling you about legislation for product safety, it can be about age-restricted sales or just having a business in the UK, and that's great. The CPSC is the US, Health Canada in Canada. I've got a picture there, just a little icon of the regulatory robot from the CPSC. So again, if you put that into your web browser, it will bring up the CPSC regulatory robot where you can walk through, put your product in, if you want to go back to the kettle, and then it will give you an idea on what regulatory regime is applicable in the US for your product. Then in Australia, you've got the ACCC, the Australia Competition and Consumer Commission. You've got the European Commission website, which will have all of the legislation on it. The Speak website, I highly recommend having a look at that if you're selling products within Europe and you want to know what the requirements are. And of course, ICW, they often send regular updates out about key legislation or things that's going to be happening or changing in the future. So once you know the legislation, it's really important to try and keep on top of that as well. And I just want to mention another thing. It came out, say recently, it was 3 months ago now, right, in December 2022, but it's worth not just about, this is kind of indirectly related to legislation, right? This is the new product safety risk assessment methodology in the UK, and it's worth being aware about these things that are going on. I know it's a lot and it can be really overwhelming, but coming back to that network that you have and reaching out, and this is available if you put it into your web browser, you put PRISM in there, product safety risk assessment methodology, you can download this. This is a guide for market surveillance authorities, but it's definitely worth knowing what they're looking at when they're looking at your product, so you can have an idea of the criteria that they're looking for. And that is the end of the webinar. So I've taken 40 minutes. I think I've done great on the timing. I think people are still with me. They're still with me, which is great. If you have any questions, the chat function is working now. We did put earlier on, and I'm going to redo it. I'm going to put the a questionnaire that we have, which we really would appreciate you taking the time to fill out. It's not that long. It really is quick. So if you could fill out that questionnaire just about this session and how useful you found it. And remember, this is the start of 5, so we can amend and tweak for the next sessions that are coming up. Thank you so much for your participation and for putting the information on Menti, and we will go away and have a look at that. Happy to stay for the next 5 minutes if anyone has any questions. So I think some people have worked for the asked about the recording, and the recording will come out to you. Put in the chat. One day after the webinar. Wow, that's impressive. Thank you, ICW team and Grace. So you should get the recording within the next 24 hours. So if you haven't had it by Friday, there's the email on there. Let me put the email on the chat function. You should all have it anyway. Feel free to contact them, and they'll make sure you have the recording. Thank you. I won't call out names because of the recording, but thanks. Yeah, someone mentioned risk assessment PRISM. Yep, I've put that in there. I think maybe you've said it before I did it, and I'll put the link in the chat. Is it okay to say that harmonised standards? Yeah. So somebody asked a question, is it okay to say that harmonised standards are mandatory? It's a good question. If I was forced with a binary answer, then I would say yes. But it is debatable. You could debate it. But fundamentally, you could argue that they're mandatory. Really, the only piece, so there is in the legislation for plugs and sockets. This is a plug and socket checker from Electrical Safety First, a really good tool to have. So there's a plug standard BS 1363 that isn't specifically noted in legislation, so you can't really argue that one. But yes, I would say that it is mandatory, but you still may get people that would argue that one. But that's what I would say to that question. And I think that's all the questions for now. Yeah, perfect. Okay, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hopefully will see you at the next session where we're going to be talking about the general product safety regulations. Hope everyone has a great week. Thank you.